Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. This is your midweek roundup of all things maker and embedded and lovely. And today we have a nice mix of things. There are some new products that we're going to take a look at. A very inventive capacitor-based backup battery for MCU projects. That's from Blues, formerly Blues Wireless. We're also going to be looking at a new part from StMicro, and it is just a part that you can get a development kit for. The thing that makes it exciting is that it's going to be probably the thing that replaces PIR sensors, not just being able to sense people when they move, but being able to sense people when they aren't moving. It's going to kind of change things in the smart home setup a bit, probably. And we're also going to look at some very inventive funding website things and an amazing project from the Electromaker website as well. So with all of that to get through, let's get on with the show. We're going to start this week's show by talking about a new product from Blues, formerly known as Blues Wireless. They've rebranded to Blues. And if you're familiar with that name, it's because we talked about them a few times in the past. They make a number of things, but they're most well known for their cellular IoT products, specifically the Note card. So maybe let's start there. So, Blues' Note card is cellular IoT made, well, easy and affordable, as it says on the store page. For the brief amount of time I had one of these, I found that to be entirely true. There's a number of ways that you can work with this, and as you can see, it's M2 slot form factor. But there's a few interesting things about it. I mean, you can use pretty much any host MCU. They do have their own Swan development board MCU. They also have a Note carrier board, which is designed to take a Note card and an MCU and work it all together. But the broad idea here is that this is low power, very easy to use cellular IoT. If I remember correctly, I never had the chance to actually fiddle with this personally myself, but even if you don't have a host MCU, you can just issue commands. I think there's AT commands, but also something crazy with JavaScript like JSON. We're going to have to come back to the Note card when I have more time to talk about it and get another one in my hands physically, because I see so many awesome projects cropping up on the Electromaker project pages featuring them. But that's not what we're talking about today. I just wanted to give a little bit of context to the new product that they've just released, which is called Scoop. Now, I do actually have a Scoop right here in my hand, unfortunately without a Note card to pair it to, but I am going to try pairing it to one of my development boards later on, just to have a bit of a play with it. I literally just received this as I was about to film the show, so I haven't really had time to fiddle with it yet, but I was very excited when I opened the package and realised what it is. Because this looks like a battery, but it is not. This is a lithium-ion capacitor. So, what makes a lithium-ion capacitor such an exciting addition to the Blues line? And bear in mind, as I mentioned before, this could be used with pretty much anything. Obviously, Blues are marketing it towards using with their hardware, and there's a good reason why they would, because their hardware is fantastic. It slots together. You don't need to do any soldering. It's legitimately some of the best prototyping stuff you can get for cellular Wi-Fi at the minute. But you could incorporate this design into any of your own designs. Have this as, and you could even have this as something you added to a project after the fact. But yes, what makes the lithium-ion capacitor so interesting? There's a number of reasons, but the one they've put here is probably the main one that people are going to go for. It has a lower self-discharge rate than traditional LiPo batteries. If you wanted this to be the backup power for your project, especially if that project is something critical for safety, say a temperature measurement on a piece of equipment that can't get too high or low in a place that's hard to reach, you want to know if there's any issues with that setup. So let's say you programmed it so that if the power went out, it would start drawing from this charge capacitor. Also, it would detect that charge had that difference in charge had happened, and it would then send a message along with its next data dump saying, by the way, main power cut out, we're still running because of this, but you might want to send someone out to check on what's going on, which is infinitely better than your very remote, very mission critical bit of equipment just stopping working altogether. Now, one of the other things that is a benefit is a wider temperature range, but rather than me trying to summarize what is already well summarized here, let me just read a little bit of the product page. So, Scoop features a 250 farads 3.8 volt lithium-ion capacitor, LIC, a special type of capacitor which is able to operate in a wider range of temperatures than LiPos, has a lower self-discharge rate, and does not have the shipping restrictions familiar to anyone who has worked with lithium-based batteries. Those shipping restrictions, by the way, are one of the main reasons why we have had so much trouble with some of our prizes getting to people, incidentally. Whenever I've shipped something with a battery in it, I have had to jump through a huge amount of regulatory hoops just to give things away. It's been a bit of a nightmare. Anyway, the features of Scoop. As mentioned, the 3.8 volt lithium-ion 250 farad capacitor, reliable power and stable delivery over a short period of time. This is crucial. These things are way more stable than lithium-ion batteries, but do not have the same capacity. Connectors. JST battery connectors, PH2POS wired for Adafruit style packs. So that's StMicro or something? No, what am I talking about? That's information. No, sorry, I had a complete brain fart there. Yeah, basically, this is the same way that Adafruit wire up the batteries that they sell. And the charge connector J1, as I've already mentioned, 4.9 to 24 volts. Output connector 2.5 to 3.8 volts with 4 pairs of through-hole mounted male header pins. So, well, actually, they're not in on this one, I think. But yes, the idea being that you can attach your own header pins to it and do whatever you want with it, attach it to a different part of your circuit or not. Now, while I am kind of excited about this and I'm looking forward to trying it out with something I have lying around here, as I said before, perhaps, unfortunately, I don't have any Blues gear. I've given it all away on the show. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to having a fiddle with this. It's just arrived now. There's not all that much more to say about it other than just 2 important things. One is the price. It is very cheap. It is $10 for this board. So that's $10 for the board with the cap on it, with the charging circuitry and everything, plug and play, ready to go kind of thing. And the thing I mentioned before about detecting when the power has gone out, there is actually a power outage detection project, which is for the note card, which is an interesting thing. Like that's exactly what I was talking about. Detect when the power goes out, then you can switch to this, and yeah, if you're using a backup LiPo battery supply, or as it's saying here, this, you can see if your project has cut out of mains power and then go out and check on it. I've been consistently impressed with the stuff that Blues put out, and we met them briefly at Embedded World and had a chat, and yeah, they just seem like a company that are really trying to not only make good tech, but make a really good background for developers. It's all really well labeled and really well documented. Everything, as you can see, has examples. Down the side here, there's examples and guides and tutorials for everything that they have put out, including all of the data sheets if you want to get really down and dirty with it as well. I will leave it at that for now, but if you're interested in finding out more about Scoop and any of the other Blues stuff, I'll leave a link to their website in the description. And of course, if you look at the project section on Electromaker and search for Note Carrier, Note Card, or Blues Wireless, you'll find a bunch of projects that people have done using Blues hardware as well. Up next, we're going to be looking at a development board from Olimex. Now, they have put out a variety of different development boards and add-on boards over the years. In fact, they even have their own integrated system called Micro UNext, or PUNext, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is very similar to Adafruit's STEMMA system, or Sparkfun's Quick system, or the Grove system. It's solderless click-on boards for various different things. However, their latest development board is sort of interesting because it's an ESP32 S3 development kit with a bunch of interesting features which we will talk about. But it's one of the first ones I've seen that is sold specifically with a view to running Linux on it, and this is kind of new to me. So, before we go into that part of it, let's just have a quick look at the board itself. It is €12. You can order it directly from Olimex, and it is, by itself, just a pretty nicely set out ESP32 S3 development board if you're interested in getting started with it. So, just a quick rundown of the features. It is a dual-core extensor LX7 MCU capable of running at 240 MHz. Apart from its 512 kilobytes of internal SRAM, it also comes with integrated 2.4 GHz, 802.11 BGN Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5 plus low energy connectivity that provides long range support. And yeah, so it has the chip, it has 8 megabytes of flash, as it did not mention in the splash paragraph here. And the 8 megabytes of flash, I imagine, is one of the reasons. 8 megabytes of RAM, 8 megabytes of flash is probably one of the reasons why it's able to run Linux. I may be wrong about that, but that just seems like the idea for me. There are a couple of other nice things to see here as well, though. So, for example, there's a status LED and a charging LED, because this does have a battery connector and a battery manager chip on it. It also is capable of measuring how much battery power is available and sensing external current, which is also useful if you want to use it in a, current sensing environment. And yeah, things like automatic power switching between the USB and LiPo, which again could be useful if you're using the USB to power it, but that power source goes down. It could be used as a backup power source, something we have just talked about. I wonder if you could, in fact, attach a Scoop to it as the backup power source. I don't see any reason why not, funnily enough. And the aforementioned Micro UNext connector, which I'm assuming is what they're meaning by the PUNext, Micro UNext connector. So yeah, a very nicely capable ESP32 S3 development board by itself. Certainly worth looking at for that reason. But yeah, as I've mentioned, I can't think of another ESP32 development board that has been released with the idea of saying we have got Linux working on this board. So let's get to the core of this. Linux running on these boards is a community operation. A name that I was not familiar with until right now is Max Filipov, who appears to have done a lot of stuff for porting things to extensor chips, or system on chips, and is the GitHub owner, as it were, of the Linux extensor project. Now, I don't know how much of this was solo code, how much of this was contribution code. It's all open source after all, and this is the core of it. And if you do get this development board, or just curious, you can find on the store page, which will will be linked in the video description, the Linux build instructions and the Linux image itself. So here, for example, this is just the, I believe this is, yeah, okay, sorry, this is just the documentation for the board itself, which is an interesting enough read, but the Linux side of it just links out to this. How to boot Linux ESP32 S3 in the playground mode. Done by the legend who I just mentioned, JCMVBKBC, who is Max Filipov, the person we just talked about. Yeah, I haven't tried this, I haven't fiddled with it. I do know that you can get it working because, yeah, here it is. You know, this is Linux running on an ESP32 S3 via UART, I should imagine. And by the way, like many boards are doing these days, one of the things that's quite nice about this is that you do have power and UART, and on one USB-C port. You also have JTAG and debugging, all of that kind of stuff on another USB-C port. And I like the separation there, and the fact that you don't need to probe in any way. That's nice. So yes, I don't really have much more to say about it other than that, because we look at so many development boards and development kits on this show with small variations, and those small variations are really the key here. The price is always important, and the small variation as to how it will work with what you're wanting to do with it. Are you looking for something that's super low powered, no bells and whistles, but that works with Zigbee? Then there's a development board out there for you. The new C6 boards are probably the ones that you're going to be looking for in that respect, I should imagine. But yeah, this is something completely different. It fits in nicely with Olimex's own line of stuff, and of course, if you want to, while you're on the site here, have a look at those, you can. But the Linux side of it I thought was super interesting. And unless I'm missing something, I feel like this is a relatively new thing. I know the idea of Linux running on an ESP32 has been theoretically possible for a while, but I didn't know there was a proper Linux kernel version working that wasn't just some kind of homegrown idea of what Linux could look like, but without any of the real backbone and file system and all of that kind of stuff. If I am wrong, please do let me know in the comments. We're going to move on now to the Embeetle IDE, which is a free-to-use piece of software designed to make programming MCUs a lot easier. Now, I came across the project relatively recently, and it is something that you can get free. It is free to use. It's not open source, but it is completely free to use, and it is something that is designed to basically cut away all of the toolchain grabbing and getting for a million different boards. Depending on what vendor you get your board for, there's generally two choices. You either get their SDK, their toolchain, use their IDE, or you hope someone has ported it to the Arduino IDE. There is a third option, which is completely rolling your own toolchain from scratch, and that is a kind of personal hell that not many people want to subject themselves to. The idea of Embeetle is that they just strip all of that away. And what they're trying to do right now is basically add everything, as far as I can tell, at least all of the popular different targets for programming to one IDE that you can just say, this is what I'm using, and then get going. So you just have to learn to use one piece of software rather than multiple. That's the idea. Now, the reason I'm mentioning it here is because A, it's a really cool idea, that is nice, but B, they have actually started a Kickstarter specifically for one feature. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we had a RISC-V special, which covered mostly the CH32V003, which was a new, insanely cheap, a 10-cent part, RISC-V part that a few people had grabbed and done things with. Now, BitLooney made the incredible supercluster, and CNLaw, being CNLaw, made entirely his own toolchain in order to work with it, and made this absolutely beautiful flyback transformer, which is controlled by a RISC-V MCU. And since then, by the way, he has cracked how to do USB programming of it. So the development boards that are being made with his tech will be able to be programmed like an Arduino via USB. That's for another day. But this has not gone unnoticed by Embeetle, and they have launched a Kickstarter specifically in order to get the WCH microcontrollers working with Embeetle. So they want to target the V003, the 203, and the 307, which are three variants of the same kind of cheap CH32 chips. And it's kind of a unique thing, really. I don't think I've ever come across a free piece of software crowdfunding a single addition to the software. And I don't really have any feelings one way or the other about it. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just sort of unique. So, yeah, there's a video here which is essentially just saying what I've just said with a few images. They already target a bunch of different boards in Embeetle, and they want to target these RISC-V boards. So I think the best way to really approach this is to go and get Embeetle. It is a free piece of software. You can download download it today for free. It's something that I would certainly have a bit of a fiddle with when I have the time to do so. I really am interested to see, for example, what the workflow is like for STM32 boards, because I've used the official STM Cube IDE 64, whatever it's called. I always call it Super Mario STM32 software. And I've also got a very bare bones toolchain that I've worked with in the past when I was trying to learn FreeRTOS, that's what it's called. I'd be very interested to see how easy it is to get going with this. And if you are interested in trying to help the Embeetle team bring this to their free software, then you can head to this Kickstarter page, which I will be linking in the description. And yeah, as with many things on the show, I find this to be a really interesting idea, and I don't have any strong feelings one way or the other. But when it comes to free software, I feel like this is a fairly acceptable thing to do. Rather than saying, just to give a one-time donation for the software itself, or forcing people to buy the software, or licenses or anything, this is an interesting thing. However, the one thing I do also want to mention, just because I know it is very important to some people, is Embeetle is free software. It is not open source software. So if that is something that is an issue to you, then of course you have to bear that in mind. Up next, I want to give a very fast sort of high-level overview of a single part, which might sound odd because we usually cover sort of development kits or, easy-to-use hobby-end stuff, whereas this is very much a part. I mean, the main splash page for this thing does not even have an image of it on it. But this is a low-power, high-sensitivity infrared IR sensor for presence and motion detection with the catchy name STHS34PF80. So why am I so excited about this? Well, as always, we can turn to the fantastic CNX software to give a nice rundown of why. Not only is this a good rundown of why, they've taken the extra step. They contacted ST and actually have a response from StMicro themselves about the part and the differences between them. So let's start with the very high-level stuff. This is an infrared sensor. This is different from PIR sensors, which are passive and which require lenses in order to have a wide field of vision. And the main difference, the main high-level difference is PIR sensors require movement in order to detect occupancy and detect somebody there. These do not. So that means that this isn't just about burglar alarms anymore. If you've ever been in a room that uses a PIR sensor in order to determine whether the lights should be on or not, and then the lights have turned off, it's quite annoying. This is one very kind of simple example of where something like this might be useful. Now, I'm not going to go over the exact specs for this part here, but there is a couple of things that I do think are worth looking into. So it can have a range of up to 4 meters without a lens. So it doesn't need a lens in order to have the field of vision that other things do. Just by the way that the sensor works, I assume it has a better field of vision than other alternatives that are similar. And then there's other things that are frankly above my level of understanding. I don't really understand infrared sensitivity or the noise flow when it comes to visual stuff. I understand to a small extent, but not really in this case. However, like many things these days, embedded into the part itself is a smart algorithm for presence and motion detection. It's doing this on the part itself, and then it has a programmable output data rate, so you can decide how much data you're going to be getting from that in order to fit it into the speed your system is working at and the power requirements of your system. While we're talking about power, it can run from 1.7 volts and it only takes 10 microamps of power, which, as it mentions here, is a lower power consumption than regular PIR sensors. Now, here's the really interesting part. As I mentioned, Jean-Luc from CNX has contacted ST about it with questions, and they got back to him, which I think is very interesting. So I just want to briefly read out this section now. I strongly advise going and reading the entire article. CNX software is one of the best places I've come across for just giving the rundown of new parts from Arduino right through to really high-level stuff like parts like this. But this one section I just want to read out to you. So this is the reply from StMicro when questioned about when someone would want to use this over, say, a time-of-flight sensor or a PIR. So, an infrared sensor and a time-of-flight sensor have different and complementary behaviors. While this part, the IR part, can detect human presence to about 10 meters with power consumption down to single-digit microamps or microamps, a time-of-flight sensor has the best-in-class accuracy for distance measurement. The part, the infrared part, just to save me from reading out the part number every time, is therefore better suited to low-power systems, like always-on systems, and extended range reach. It's also exciting to note that by doing sensor fusion, combining both devices, so infrared, this new infrared, not passive infrared, and time of flight, designers and solution creators can achieve the best performance possible for presence sensors using the infrared part to wake up the time of flight sensor when human presence is detected. This can contribute to saving energy and to only doing very accurate analysis when it is necessary, which is super interesting. And there's a table here on the CNX software page as well that you can look at, which is sort of interesting. And I'm going to move on because I'm running out of time for the show. But one thing I will mention already is that if this is grabbing you and you're saying, oh, this is super cool, you either want to incorporate this into one of your designs or maybe incorporate it into your smart home and get rid of the PIR sensors and get a much better, lower power usage and generally better part. There are already evaluation kits available from Mauser. They are €32. I'll link the CNX software article in the description because these links are all at the bottom of the article. And the part itself is available. I mean, it's almost $7 for one. And obviously, as you go up and up and up and up, the cost comes down. Although I imagine most of the audience of this show would be interested in the development kit. If you are enjoying the Electromaker show, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Next to the subscription box, you'll notice there's a drop down, and if you select all notifications there, you'll get a notification, but just in the top right of the YouTube browser window. This isn't like a desktop notifications thing. And that means you will be notified whenever we put out a new show. That's usually just a weekly Electromaker show, sometimes product of the week. Occasionally, when we go to events and Embedded World and all of those kind of trade shows, you'll see some interviews with the actual people making the hardware, which is quite interesting too. The other thing that you can do to help us on YouTube is simply just liking the video. I know that seems like an asinine thing and people have been asking for likes on YouTube for years, but it really does make a difference. The whole like, comment, subscribe routine of YouTube is something that they use in order to kind of bump videos up and recommend them to more people. And so if you could do that, that would be very useful. However, if you're looking for a much more concrete way to support us, there is a way that you can do that. And that is, of course, by shopping at the Electromaker shop. Electromaker is an online community of makers, and we also have the Electromaker show, but we do have a shop that stocks everything that we talk about in the show and in our online community. And for the projects that you're putting on the project page, pretty much anything that you need for your project can be bought in our store, from things like the Raspberry Pi boards and Arduino boards and the big name stuff, right down to quite obscure little things that are quite hard to find. Also, we are capable of supplying things in bulk. Just get in touch with our store via email first and we'll be able to give you a quote on that too. So yes, whether you're thinking of buying something for your next project or a beginner kit for someone as a Christmas or birthday present, consider looking at the Electromaker shop. It really is the best way to support us because we don't run YouTube ads, we don't have a Patreon or any of that kind of stuff. We are a shop-based channel, if there is such a thing. Anyway, with our kind of self-referential advert part of the show over, let's get back to the fun stuff. Moving on to funding website things, the part of our show where we look at things on funding websites. Now, we have already looked at one Kickstarter this episode, but if you are interested in backing new pieces of hardware, there's no better site to go to than Crowd Supply. And the first thing we're going to look at today is Crowvision. And this is from Elecro, and if you find Elecro a familiar name, that's because they've put all kinds of kits out in the past, most notably the CrowPi kit, which featured in the first ever Electromaker show. This is what we're looking at now. This is me looking very different, with very different lighting in this very same attic, and holding the first generation of the CrowPi laptop, which I thought was fantastic. It's sort of like a play-in kit for a Raspberry Pi, where there's a Raspberry Pi built into it and a bunch of sensors and all this kind of stuff. In fact, there we go. Yes, you can see a much nicer image of it there. And then they had just brought out their new version, CrowPi 2, which was a similar idea. Raspberry Pi built into it. You'll also maybe know Elecro just because they're one of the more popular sellers of just general Arduino and Raspberry Pi kits for starters. So that brings us on to Crowvision, which is the latest thing from Elecro that they're going to be starting the funding stages of soon. And put simply, this is a sort of do-it-all touchscreen for using with various different boards, anything that can kind of work with it. So Raspberry Pi is an obvious choice here, but you could also use this with, say, an NVIDIA Jetson Nano or one of the many clone boards that work with Raspberry Pi. You could attach an x86 board to the back of it, like one of the many new ranges of ones. There's no reason why you couldn't attach, say, the Latte Panda Sigma to the back of it and have an insanely powerful computer, or the Delta or something like that, because what you're seeing here is 11.6 inch touchscreen with a 1366 by 768 resolution and a driver board on the back of it, which covers both the images itself and the touchscreen. So, two things about this that jumped out to me immediately. Slidable standoffs. Wonderful idea. I really like that. You slide it into the right spot and then you can put your board on. This allows for a multitude of different ways of working with it and putting a multitude of different boards on it. It's a really elegant solution. I really, really like that. And I'm going to jump way ahead here because towards the end of the video it shows how this would all work together, how it would all attach. So here we have the Raspberry Pi, and you can attach the Raspberry Pi to the HDMI part of the board. This is attaching a USB into the main part of the Raspberry Pi, which is for power, because the board takes a 12-volt wall wart, the driver board, and that will put out enough power to power a Raspberry Pi 4, apparently. Also, this USB port is plugging into the micro USB port here, because that is what takes care of the touchscreen. And yeah, it works. I don't know if it does just work straight out of the box like that, but even so, that's a quite impressive, simple plug. And with those movable standoffs, it seems like a very useful thing indeed. So the page also alludes to the fact that there will be a kit, but that is all I'm going to say about this at this point, for the simple fact that this is a pre-launch project. There is no price attached to this as of yet. As with anything on Crowd Supply, if you'd like to get email notifications about it, you can add your email to this box here and subscribe to all notifications about the project. But yes, Elecro have put out a bunch of fantastic things over the years. I've always been very impressed with the things they put out. They send some things to me for review, and some things I've just straight out bought because they look like interesting stuff, and they're always very competitively priced. So I'm very interested to see what they price this at, given that there are other touchscreens out there which sort of do what this one does, but this is a very, very tidy design. At least it looks like it. Now, up next, a pre-launch project on Crowd Supply called Roomsense IQ, which, without even meaning to, kind of incorporates a few things that we talked about in this show already. This is a room occupancy and temperature and humidity measuring sensing device, which has a powerful microcontroller on board. In fact, it has the ESP32 S3 that we talked about earlier in the show as its onboard controller. And it also uses multiple ways of judging occupancy and distance, which is, again, quite interesting. In this case, it's using a PIR sensor paired with a millimeter wave radar. This is what it looks like on the inside. And the idea with this is that this is something that can attach to your home assistant. It uses MQTT, an open protocol, and you can use it to automate various things based on temperature in the room, based on who is in the room, and it goes down to quite an amount of detail. So before we look at what this thing can do from a sort of software and automation point of view, let's quickly talk about the hardware. As it says, it's the state-of-the-art room monitoring device employs a fusion of cutting-edge millimeter wave radar technology and PIR sensors to accurately detect and measure the movement of individuals. In addition, it features a temperature and humidity sensor for indoor climate control, an ambient light sensor for intelligent light control. But here's where it gets interesting. Roomsense IQ has a bunch of very nicely named things, but ProxySense is one of them, and CalSense and BedSense and EnergySense. Are you noting a theme? But this is actually very, very cool. So, one of the standout features of Roomsense IQ is ProxySense, which enables proximity-based controls. ProxySense accurately measures the distance to a target, empowering users to establish customized automation zones. This includes defining zones for working at your desk or relaxation while watching TV, among other possibilities. So yeah, I mean, long story short, for someone like me, if I had that in this room, that would mean when I'm here at the desk and I'm ready to do work or ready to do electromaker stuff, that turns on the harsh show lights that makes sure the desk is up here, that's standing up, and that I'm ready to do my work. As soon as I wander off over here and sit down at the admittedly very underused soldering and fun and silly desk, all of that stuff goes away, and it has nice light and ambient sounds and all the things I want to do over there while I'm relaxing and not working. And it could do that in an automated fashion if that's the kind of thing that you're into. And the idea of a high level of automation is something that is very interesting, especially if you're doing it in a very DIY way. And as I mentioned before, this will work with Home Assistant via MQTT. So other features include CalSense, which essentially is a way of making blind spots. It says here, creation of blind spots for each sensor, such as filtering out the disturbances from a shaking curtain. Additionally, it facilitates the establishment of customized baselines for the sensor, presumably meaning you can set an overall sensitivity for it to work within or something along those lines. BedSense, another powerful feature, which is bed occupancy. So yeah, if you want to trigger a whole nighttime routine just as soon as you lie down on your bed, if you want to just plonk yourself down without having to worry about turning the lights and the telly and everything else off, it can do that for you. Again, it senses that you're in bed, sends the appropriate message to Home Assistant, jobs are good. And EnergySense, and this is the only one which I'm a little bit unfamiliar as to how this might work. It enables users to monitor the energy usage of devices controlled by Roomsense IQ. With real-time insights and updates, homeowners can gain deeper understanding of their energy consumption patterns. This information empowers them to make informed decisions about their energy usage, leading to greater efficiency and potentially lower their utility bills. I feel like I'm not fully certain how that works. I feel like if you're already sensing the power usage in your Home Assistant, you'll already have something set up for that and it doesn't have to go through this, unless I'm misunderstanding it. And if by some strange coincidence the guys who are running this see this and understand how I've got this wrong, maybe you could explain to me in the comments exactly what that means. Regardless of the bit that I don't understand, this looks like a really awesome little bit of kit. Very professional looking, and a few levels above the occupancy and generalized connectivity connected things that you see already. I know IKEA have something that's not dissimilar to this, but it doesn't do nearly what this does, and that's clamped to IKEA's smart home system. This is open, works with MQTT, works with Home Assistant, and has a bunch of nice things. So I already talked about this for longer than I meant to. If you'd like to know more about it, you can find the page in the description of this video, as always, and yes, sign up for all of the things that you want to know about it, including when it goes live. And speaking of when things go live, both of these being pre-launch projects are things that we will definitely be talking again about in the future when they start funding, so we can find out how much they will cost and whether you want to go back and actually support their funding campaigns. Finally, this week we're going to talk about a project on the Electromaker website that really grabbed my eye because it is completely unfinished. In fact, it is just the start of the idea of a project, and yet it is already so compelling and so well presented that I wanted to share it with you so that we can all start following this project and hopefully get the updates as and when they happen. I am talking about Make It For Less's Macrogatchi, which is the next Tamagotchi evolution. Now, if you are around about my age, Tamagotchis were just crushingly popular for a small amount of time. They were so popular in our school that they had to be banned at one point because people were fighting over them. And people were so invested in their Tamagotchis' lives that people weren't taking school seriously. But then again, none of us took school that seriously. Anyway, this is a really, really well put together and presented project from Make It For Less. And yeah, really the key here is the YouTube video. This is a wonderfully produced YouTube video on what is another criminally undersubscribed channel. So yes, Make It For Less's video is absolutely fantastic. It is a thorough walkthrough of what the project is and why they're doing it and what they are doing about it. And to sum it up, they've said, here's a Tamagotchi, but the original Tamagotchi had super simple MCU in it, really crappy Nokia screen, crappy buttons, let's improve it. Now, of course, for the time, these things were amazing. This was tech from 20, 30 years ago, okay? But still, there's a lot that can be done these days. You have ESP32s that are incredibly powerful. You have screens that are small but really high resolution. And these are all things that are talked about in this sort of walkthrough as to what it could be. And as you're seeing there, this is sort of a mock-up as to what could come, with nice buttons, with a proper screen, and yeah, with newer behavior and perhaps more complex behavior, and of course, much nicer animations. And yeah, the video itself goes through lots of things with lots of great jokes, fantastic editing, talks about exactly what they want to do with the project and where the project will be going next. There's not a lot much more to say about it other than, yeah, this goes through every single thing that you need, including the parts that were used, how they're getting better sound, and yeah, all the other things that you would need to find out. I really do like the animations, even if they are placeholder. Maybe they won't be placeholder, maybe they will keep them. But yeah, if you are interested in finding out more about this, you can head to the link in the description. I'm linking the project too. You can also head over to Make It For Less's YouTube channel and drop them a subscription as well. I am really interested to see where this project goes. It's a really new idea for me, for someone to sort of sit down and say, here's what I'm planning to do, here's a mock-up of how it might be, and then we're going to go along with it. A lot of people just do something and then they try and document it sort of after the fact, but by the very nature of doing it this way, we're going to see this project grow on in every step of the way, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that. And yeah, I don't know if it's just nostalgia because of my age and because of the time it was, but the fact that someone's still thinking about the idea of Tamagotchis and making them into, you know, much better modern idea DIY devices. You know, we have a million retro handhelds now. Why not a new form of Tamagotchi, i.e. the Macrogatchi? That was our show for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for the continued support that you show this show. Thank you for all of the amazing projects that you put up on Electromaker every week. I say this relatively often, but it cannot be said enough. I think my favorite thing about being a part of Electromaker is just getting to see the projects that are people making. As my life has progressed, I've actually had less and less time to do this as a hobby, and seeing the projects that other people are coming up with, it just is absolutely wonderful for me while I look at my pile of unfinished projects that I don't have time to work on currently. There's more time coming, and I really look forward to actually putting my stuff together and being able to join the community and show you the things that I have working away next to the oscilloscope on the desk over there, which is probably collecting dust, sadly, right now. Anyway, we will be back next week with another show covering a plethora of things. It is worth noting that the week after that there will probably not be a show. I'm taking a little bit of time off, and if you are interested in doing so, there'll also be an extra link in the show notes this time. I'm raising a little bit of money for Mind, which is a UK charity for mental health. I'm doing a very, very long run quite soon. Anyway, that's enough of that. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week, as you always do. I really look forward to recording next week's show for you and wondering what wonderful things appear. Until then, I hope you have a fun, safe and creative week. Take care.